We thought we'd start with really the macro view, so a view from the balcony, as we'd say, which really helps craft or set the scene or frame up why, courageous leadership and why now, and what's the relationship between that and strategy. So some of the things we're observing, but also some of the research that's coming out from around the globe. There's a lot happening. It's probably, I know, unprecedented is an overused term and can be seen as a cliche, but it feels like we're constantly kind of saying that. So these are some of the global trends that we're seeing, which are, you can read. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but to say that there's a lot of change happening around the planet is probably an understatement. So if they're the top five global trends, what's on the radar for HR practitioners, L&D professionals, and organizations generally? So definitely well-being is still really important. How do we adapt to a change in economic climate? How do we still create high levels of engagement, culture, and a collaborative environment for people? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are still really important. And how do we skill up a workforce? What's the future of work look like? And therefore, how do we respond to that? Which I think are really quite challenging questions, but important questions to answer. And then finally, what are people looking for in organizations? So our research has indicated that meaningful work and purpose is even more important than it has been previously. And we've talked about this a lot over the years, but particularly, even at the executive and CEO level, where we often coach. And I've personally noticed that a lot of people say, I've just lost my mojo, I've lost my purpose, I've lost why I'm even doing this. And so that's really important. Things like manage financial security and compensation, flexibility and well-being, job security and stability, and then career growth and skill development. So if they're the trends, some of the reality, some of the things that we're really seeing as well from the research. So if 80%, so 80% of CEOs are dissatisfied with strategy execution, which is massive. So we can create and craft a nice strategy, but the overwhelming majority of executives and CEOs aren't satisfied with how that's implemented. So we know the execution piece is always the most challenging, particularly in a context of, constant change. We know 80% of change fails, and I know some people dispute that, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest if it doesn't fail, we don't necessarily get the benefits if we don't kind of call it a failure outright. Interestingly, half of CEOs don't feel supported. So this was research coming out from Human Synergistics only last week, which is pretty amazing. Half of CEOs don't feel supported by their organization. 75% of HR leaders report that managers are overwhelmed. That's probably not a surprise. 23% of HR leaders are confident that they have leaders who are fit for purpose, if you like, fit to lead into the future. And as it says there, 1 in 4 employees actually don't even understand the values that drive the culture of their organization. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, in organizations. There's a lot of work to do in terms of crafting strategy and then being able to implement it. But then how do we enable that? What are the key things how do we shift that 80% from 80% dissatisfied with strategy execution to 80% are really happy with it? And that's the subject of, what we're really talking about today. One of the frameworks we really like is from Patrick Lencioni, and I'm sure many of you have read his work. This is a really nice, I think, a really nice model. So you can see those 4 areas. The first one is the old 5 levels, which, has been around for a long time, but is universally well known and well liked. The second part is probably not as common, but the creating clarity and the 6 questions that we use with our clients as to help them with the strategy and helping them create clarity around that. Before I move on to that though, number 3 is over communicating that clarity, and 4, reinforcing clarity is not about, really, really over communicating. Reinforced clarity is about how do we align systems, processes, and policies. So reinforcing it from a systemic perspective. So those 6 questions, as you can see here, we've utilized these questions with clients. I remember, to make this kind of real, with a French company who had, an arm in Australia. The French headquarters had set unbelievably high targets. We spent 2 days with the executive team answering these 6 questions. They shot the lights out. They exceeded the target by 20%. And they said it was because they had clarity on these 6 areas. So for us, that clarity of strategy, we're all aligned and we know how to execute it, is really important. So that's the first part of what we think about. And how do we align that strategy with values? So you can see there is, talking about core values, using them as decision filters, and ensuring that there is an alignment there between what we say and how we behave. And the next part, so there's two more drivers for that, which Lou, would you like to take us through those?
Yes, sure. So thanks, Phil. So really, first of all, we need to draw our attention to psychological safety. And the reason that we do that is because it's the foundation for engagement and accountability. So as leaders, we need to be really conscious and aware of this. We need to actively build it and also continue to allow it to be reinforced and established at every opportunity. It's not a set and forget process. Ultimately, when we lead from, just make sure my slides are moving. Here we go. Ultimately, when we lead from that place, when we prioritize psychological safety, we create environments, as this slide highlights, where people feel safe to speak up, ask questions, challenge the status quo at times, be really honest, without fear of blame or judgment, or humiliation. And from that place, they're more likely to want to contribute, to feel like they can contribute fully, and then take ownership of their actions. So it's a beautiful balance between engagement and accountability. And this ultimately supports organisations and teams to work towards shared objectives and mutual purpose. From that, what we do is we can then turn our attention to, well, how do we turn vision into action? And this begins with us, begins with self as a leader. And we need to be conscious of how we turn up as leaders. How do we practice clarity, courage, and consistency? And then do the same within the systems within which we are operating. It's also asking the questions, what tools or resources or practices do we need to develop to support us so that we can be the best leaders we can be, but also support those around us to be their best? And then that ultimately supports vision turning into action because we're mobilizing all those around us. So it's very intimately connected. And then if we think about this through the lens of dare to lead and daring leadership, we begin to consider, well, how do we as leaders model the behaviour that helps us to create these environments where there's a shared responsibility, practice brave leadership, create and reinforce clarity in all that we do, and balance empathy and accountability. All with good intentions, but then the question is, well, how do we actually do it? And part of how we do it is we begin to look at strategic alignment and also how it meets brave leadership. And this is about understanding that real organisational success, it requires both clear direction and courageous leadership. And that's where those 6 questions that Phil has referred to really supports this, getting really, really clear about where we need to go and how we need to do it. But the other side of it is brave leadership. And there's been a lot of research around this because it's easy to say, well, we need brave leadership, but what is that? How do we do it? How do we bring that in everything that we do? Um, so part of the work, the Dare to Lead, so my slides are a little bit slow, is drawn, of course, on Brené Brown's work. And I'm sure most of you have heard of Brené Brown. Over 2 decades of studying emotional intelligence, the whole gamut, the whole range of emotional experience, particularly courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy through the lens of leadership. And you're probably aware of her books, her podcasts, her TED Talks. But the Dare to Lead program itself emerged from 7 years of really robust research and numerous questions that were asked consistently throughout the program or throughout the research, and in particular this one. What if anything about the way people are leading today needs to change in order for leaders to be successful in a complex, rapidly changing environment where we're faced with seemingly intractable challenges and an insatiable demand for innovation? It's a good question. Not an easy one to answer. However, there was one consistent answer throughout all the interviews. Does anyone have any sense of what that might be? And I've jumped. I've given you the answer. Sorry, my slides were slow, and so then no, I've jumped ahead. It's actually courage. So we need braver leaders and more courageous cultures. Yeah. So, and that's what Dare to Lead draws on. So it supports us in so many ways to be able to develop this courage. But again, it's one thing to say it, but what does it actually mean? What does it actually mean in, the way that we begin? Where do we start? And it's with this question or this recognition that our greatest leadership challenge, it's not about more skills or technical knowledge or expertise. We've got all that. We can develop that. It's about this. Our greatest challenge is ourselves spending time to recognize and answer our personal call to courage and to support those around us to do the same.